students, the topic we're discussing today is research methods in developmental psychology. The objectives of this lesson are to understand the basic principles of scientific research, measurement and experimental design, to identify the special methodological challenges of developmental research, to be aware of the ethical issues associated with research involving children, and to design and conduct research with young children. Research methods for the study of human development encompass techniques appropriate for research with children of different ages as well as with adults. Further, it includes research with individuals as well as with groups, such as families and classrooms. In all cases, the goal is the same: to use the tools of the scientific method to understand the process of human development. As with most research, developmental studies begin with a hypothesis, which is a testable statement that reflects what the researcher expects to find. The investigator uses measurable and replicable techniques to collect, study and analyze data in an effort to test the theory's usefulness. Selecting a sample is an important first step in doing research because it determines the extent to which the researcher's conclusions can be applied or generalized to the population. The main issues in developmental research include selecting a sample, designing a study, and ensuring that all ethical standards are met. In this lesson, we will restrict the discussion to research design, data collection techniques, and ethics. A research design is a plan for conducting a scientific investigation. 4 basic designs used in developmental research are case studies, ethnographic studies, correlational studies, and experiments. Let's look at each of these designs in detail. First is the case study. A case study is an in-depth analysis of a particular individual or group of individuals. For instance, we may want to explore how a child with brain injury acquired from an accident achieves her developmental milestones. While the case study research method provides a great deal of information about a specific person, the results are often difficult to generalize to larger populations. For this reason, case studies are most often used in clinical research or other cases where certain aspects of the subject's life cannot be reproduced or duplicated. The investigator, often a physician, psychologist, social worker, counselor or educator, interviews the subject, obtains background records and administers questionnaires to acquire quantifiable data about the subject. A comprehensive case study can last months or even years. Throughout the duration of the case study, the researcher documents the condition, the treatment, and the effects in relation to each patient and summarizes all of this information in individual case reports. A typical case report follows this format, including the elements such as presenting problem, which provides an understanding of the condition or problem. Then you have the case history, which gives a brief social history pertinent to the client's present problem. Third, we have the treatment, which provides information about the treatment process, including details of each session. And then there are the results of the treatment, which provides an account of treatment effects, if any. And finally is the follow-up, which gives a description of the long-term treatment effects with periodical review, if any. Although case studies are valuable for obtaining useful information about individuals and rare conditions, they tend to focus only on the pathology, that is, the characteristics and effects of a particular disease, and are therefore applicable only to individuals with similar conditions rather than to the general population. The second type of research design is ethnographic study. An ethnographic study seeks to describe the pattern of relationships, customs, beliefs, and traditions that make up a society's way of life. An example may be the exploration of how tribal communities build a society and develop their culture in remote forest areas. Ethnographic studies apply a combination of methods, including participant observation, which is a form of naturalistic observation, requiring the researcher or researchers to live or participate in the societies or smaller groups that they observe, and this could be often for long periods of time. Then we have the correlational research. A researcher in the area of developmental psychology may also attempt to estimate correlations among variables. A correlation is a relationship between two variables. Variables are factors that change and include characteristics, attitudes, behaviors, or events. The goal of correlational research is to determine whether or not a relationship exists between two or more variables, and if a relationship is found to exist, the extent of commonalities in that relationship would be the interest of the correlational research. An investigator may use case study methods, surveys, interviews, and observational techniques to discover correlations. Correlation, denoted by the symbol small r, ranges between +1 and -1. Correlation could be either positive, that is up to the value of +1, or negative, that is up to the value of -1. A correlation can also be non-existent with a value of 0. In a positive correlation, the values of the variables increase or decrease together, that is, they co-vary together. For instance, up to late teenage years, as age increases, typically height also increases. In this sense, both age and height share a positive correlation because they are moving in the same direction. In a negative correlation, one variable increases as the other variable decreases. Consider that a person gains weight due to lack of exercise. Here, as physical activity reduces, weight increases. In a non-existent correlation, there is no relationship between the increase and decrease in values of the variables. For example, there is no relation between one's height and intelligence. Correlation is commonly confused with causation. However, correlational data do not indicate a cause and effect relationship. When a correlation is present, changes in the value of one variable reflect changes in the value of the other. The correlation does not imply that one variable causes the other variable, only that both variables are somehow related. To study the effects that variables have on each other, an investigator must conduct an experiment. This brings us to the fourth design, which is the experimental design. The primary way researchers investigate causal connections among factors is through the use of experiments. Experiments involve the manipulation and measurement of variables. This research method is said to be the most scientific one. Experimental research is concerned with how and why something happens. The goal of experimental research is to test the effect that an independent variable, which the experimenter manipulates, has on a dependent variable that the experimenter observes. In other words, experimental research leads to conclusions regarding causation. Imagine that we are examining the impact of praise on children's learning. We have two groups, one receiving praise and the other not receiving praise. We would then test the children's performance on learning a task and compare the two groups in this regard. Praise is our independent variable that we are manipulating by the presence and absence of praise in the two groups, while learning given by the test performance is the dependent variable that we observe or measure. A number of factors can affect the outcome of any type of experimental research. For instance, investigators face the challenge of finding samples that are random and representative of the population being studied. Additionally, researchers must guard against experimenter bias, which is their expectations about what should or should not happen in the study that may sway the results. Researchers should also control extraneous variables such as room temperature or noise level that may interfere with the results of the experiment. In our example of the impact of praise on learning, children may underperform if there is a lot of disturbance in the room. This would lead to incorrect inferences about the relationship between praise and learning. Only when researchers carefully control extraneous variables can they draw valid conclusions about the effects of specific variables on other variables. Besides the four designs we just discussed, investigators may also employ cross-cultural and survey research. Western cultural standards do not necessarily apply to other societies. What may be normal or acceptable in one group may be abnormal and unacceptable for another group. Sensitivity to others' norms, folkways, values, mores, attitudes, customs and practices necessitates knowledge of other societies and cultures. Developmentalists may conduct cross-cultural research which is designed to reveal variations existing across different groups of people. Most cross-cultural research involves survey, direct observation, and participation observation methods of research. The challenge of this type of research is to avoid experimenter bias and the tendency to compare dissimilar characteristics as if they were somehow related. Now let's look at survey research. This involves interviewing large numbers of people. Alternatively, the researcher may administer questionnaires to many people. This would qualify as a written survey. The investigator analyzes the data obtained from surveys to learn about similarities, differences and trends, and then makes predictions about the population being studied. Advantages of survey research include the great amount of information the researcher can obtain from the large numbers of respondents despite the low cost of acquiring and processing data. Mail surveys, which require the researcher to post the questionnaires, have the added advantage of ensuring anonymity, thus prompting respondents to answer questions truthfully. Disadvantages of survey research include volunteer bias, interviewer bias, and distortion. Let's understand each of these concepts in turn. Volunteer bias occurs when a sample of volunteers is not representative of the general population. Subjects who are willing to talk about certain topics may answer surveys differently than those who are not very interested in talking or are not willing to talk in a survey. Interviewer bias, on the other hand, occurs when an interviewer's expectations or insignificant gestures such as frowning or smiling inadvertently influence the subject's responses one way or the other. Finally, distortion occurs when a subject does not respond honestly to questions. These problems limit the efficacy of surveys. The main focus of research in child development is change over time. There are certain research techniques intended to measure the relation of age to some of the variables through the progression of time, and they are cross-sectional research, longitudinal research, and cross-sequential research. These are used in conjunction with different data collection techniques and research designs chosen by an investigator. Let's take a look at the cross-sectional method. This involves looking at different groups of people of different ages at a given time. For example, a researcher might measure or observe 2-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 6-year-olds, and 8-year-olds when they are placed individually in a room with a stranger. The groups are compared with each other to determine similarities and differences in their behavior and reactions to the stranger. The benefit of this type of research is that it can be done relatively quickly, since the research data is all gathered at the same point in time. However, because data is gathered from generations of people who share the same cultural experiences, these common events may play a role in development. It thus becomes difficult to determine if something is caused by experience or the developmental process. Let's now look at longitudinal research. This involves studying the same group of individuals over an extended period of time. Data is first collected at the outset of the study and may then be gathered repeatedly throughout the length of the study. In some cases, longitudinal studies can last several decades. Let's re-look at the example we had seen under cross-sectional research. Instead of recruiting different age groups of children at one point, we may observe a single group over a number of years. So, we would record a group of children's reactions when placed alone in a room with a stranger every 2 years. That is, first we measure when they are 2 years, then when they are 4 years, followed by when they are 6 years, and finally when they are 8 years. We would then compare for similarities and differences to gain insight into developmental changes that occur with age. We may observe that younger children tend to be shy, while the same children start to instantly interact with the stranger when they are older. The benefit of this type of research is that it allows researchers to look at changes over time. You would note that longitudinal studies require enormous amounts of time and are often quite expensive. Because of this, longitudinal studies often have only a small group of subjects, which makes it difficult to apply the results to a larger population. Another problem is that participants sometimes drop out of the study over the years or over the time, shrinking the sample size and decreasing the amount of data collected. Now we look at cross-sequential research. This combines features of both the cross-sectional and the longitudinal research designs and yields a third dimension of measurement that compares cohorts or people of the same age at different points in time. Here, for instance, we may compare children aged 2, 4, 6 and 8 years in the year 2013 and then reassess them in the year 2015 when they are 4, 6, 8 and 10 years respectively, to evaluate their reactions to a stranger who is alone with them in a room. This way, we get to compare age groups with each other and with themselves to see changes across time and at a given time. Cross-sequential research can be even more expensive, but it would provide a wealth of information about inter- and intra-group differences over time. Once it has been decided which type of research design to use, the next step is to determine how the information will be gathered. Common ways of collecting data include self-reports, reports by family members, teachers and peers, observation, and behavioral or performance measures. Let's take a look at each of these data collection techniques in turn. First, we have the children's self-reports. A self-report is the information that a person provides about himself or herself by answering a set of questions devised by a researcher. Self-reports are the only way to obtain information about children's feelings and their unique perspectives on their lives. There are many ways of obtaining a self-report, and these include diary, interview, and questionnaire. The simplest form of a self-report is a diary or a log. Here, the participants are asked to record about their daily activities. They would be encouraged to describe their experiences so that the researcher obtains first-person insight and information into the phenomenon being investigated. Soliciting self-reports from children by means of interviews is another mode of gathering information about child development. Here, the child is engaged in a dialogue in order to elicit his or her responses to questions raised by the interviewer. Questionnaires offer researchers a quick and easy way to collect a great deal of information. One weakness of this method is that it reduces variety, creativity, and individuality of responses. In cases where the subject is unable to fill out a questionnaire, say with very young children, questions are often posed through a structured interview. A second method of collecting data on child development is to solicit information from people who know the child well. Child developmental researchers seek such information from family members, teachers, and peers such as friends and classmates of the child. Next, we have the observational research. There are two different types of observation: laboratory and naturalistic. The laboratory observation involves observing the subject of interest in a laboratory setting that attempts to recreate the conditions in which the behavior occurs. The benefit of this is that the situation can be controlled by the experimenter. The drawback of laboratory observation is that it reduces the external validity of the study because the setting is unnatural. Secondly, the subject is aware that he or she is being studied, which may lead him or her to behave differently. Naturalistic observation, conversely, allows researchers to observe participants in the real-world settings, that is, in their own environment. The strength of this method is that it allows researchers to view behavior as it really happens in a natural setting. Hence, the external validity is considered to be high. The limitation, however, is that the researcher cannot control outside variables that might impact upon behavior. When investigators decide to observe children and their families directly, they must determine what kinds of behavior they would record. If they are interested in a broad range of behaviors, they may use a specimen record by which researchers would note everything a person does within a given period of time. If they are interested in studying only a particular type of behavior, however, they may use a technique called event sampling, in which they record individuals' behavior only when an event of particular interest occurs. Alternatively, in the time sampling approach, the researcher records a set of predetermined behaviors that occur within a specified time period. When the researcher is interested in a particular behavior, he or she may structure a situation to observe the behavior using a method called structured observation. Next, we look at behavioral and performance measures. For many kinds of research, investigators use more objective measures of behavior or performance, in addition to self-reports or observation. Tests and other behavioral and neuropsychological measures may be used to assess abilities, skills, knowledge and physiological responses. These assessments are less objective compared to self-reports and observation. For example, we use the Wetzler Intelligence Scale for children to obtain a comprehensive picture of the child's cognitive functions. As with any research, investigators working with children must be fully aware of the ethical standards that they ought to abide by. The first important ethical standard is the right to be fully informed. Every child has the right to full and truthful information about the purposes of and the procedure to be used by a study in which he or she is to participate. Next is the right to give informed and voluntary consent. The child participant has the right to agree or disagree either orally or in writing to participate in a research project. Third is the right not to be harmed in any way. Every child has the right to know that he or she will not experience any physical or psychological harm or damage as a result of the research procedure. Fourth, the right to withdraw voluntarily from research. The child participant has the right to withdraw at any point from continued participation in any research project. Next is the right to be informed of the results of the research. Every child has the right to know the results of the research project. Sixth is the right to confidentiality. The child participant has the right to know that personal information gathered as part of the research project will remain private and confidential. Seventh, the right to full compensation. Every child has the right to be fully compensated for her or his time and effort as a research participant, even if the child withdraws and does not complete her or his participation. Finally, the right to beneficial treatments. The child participant has the right to profit from any beneficial treatments provided to other participants in the research project. These 8 ethical standards must be met by the researchers during the research process. In this lesson, we discussed research designs, data gathering techniques, and ethics for research with children. Child psychologists use the scientific method in their research. The goal of research is to analyze the area of interest, collect data about the topic, and draw conclusions based upon this data. Investigators formulate hypotheses on the basis of theories and use different techniques to collect and analyze data in order to test the correctness and the usefulness of these theories. The 4 basic designs used in developmental research are case studies, ethnographic studies, correlational studies, and experimental designs. The main focus of research in child development is change over time. There are certain research techniques intended to measure the relation of age to some other variables through the progression of time. These include cross-sectional research, longitudinal research, and cross-sequential research. Having decided which type of research design to use, the following step is to determine how the information will be gathered. Common ways of gathering data include self-reports, reports by family members, teachers and peers, observation, and behavioral or performance measures. Often these techniques may be combined to suit the research design and provide a comprehensive picture. Whatever the design or method chosen, the investigator must ensure that the study abides by the ethical standards required of research with children, so that there is no violation of the rights of the child and of those involved.